Hey guys, welcome to part two of the redoing my old piece tutorial. And in this second video, I'd like to talk a little bit about inspiration before we dive into looking at the brief I created for what we're going to be doing. Um, I think it's really important to look at other people's work, look at 3D renderings, look at photographs, look in books, and genuinely live your life outside of your own art, because you need to draw in a certain amount of appeal into your image. And by looking at successful work and successful images and real world constructions, you're able to piece together an idea that I think is more appealing than something that you would initially get from rushing into something. And what I mean by that is you might look at an image, say like this one up on the screen, and say, hey, we have holographic representations in the image that we're trying to tackle. How do those images look when we're going to finalize them? Are they going to be stacked up like this? Are they going to be like one big plane? How are we going to tackle that? What about the surface on the floor here? Is that something that I find appealing? So it's important to jump through images and other people's work, really, and photos, and just say, what is appealing? Like, what is the best thing in this image? And is it this lighting here? Is it this soft shadow? Is it this little play of objects on the table? Is that what draws me to this particular composition? Is it the way that these holograms bend? Is it the chair? Is it the close-up foreground? Is it this wonderful blue lighting and then this background, or these little lights back here, or the strange floor texture, or the simplicity of the image, or the bending of the perspective? Like, looking at images, photos, and otherwise, these are the things I like to pick out before I jump into establishing the final look of an image. And I consider this initial phase of looking at things and scribbling to be the most important in creating my images. And the reason is because I want to make an image that appeals to me and can appeal to a wider audience. And a part of that is asking ourselves, what makes something look good? Is it this light here? Is that interesting? Is it this really strange wiry lamp here? We can go through all these images that I found particularly appealing. The contrast of, in this particular image, of orange and blue being complementary colors, and how they play off each other and how they reflect, and these beautiful women in water, or what are these beds happening here? Like, this cutout up here with this light pouring through, is it like a hive? Is it like, what's happening up there? Is there fire? Like, what's happening? And this wonderful soft shape. Like, there's so many inspiring things around us that exist in real life already. And these are photos, by the way, and renderings. You know, just it's the complexity? Is it the simplicity? What's happening with the reflection? Is it darker or brighter? Like, we can learn so much already just from looking at images. And at the time that I look at these things, I try to make little notes on a notepad I keep on my desk, and I write down things like, what if we put in little lights by the counter, and what might that look like? Can we diffuse them? So I might write something like, oh, put a little desk, just a little note on a piece of paper for myself, and say like, let's try implement that into the image. This is an image I find particularly inspiring for moving forward, and the reason is because I really like what's happening on these glass panes here. Firstly, they're separating areas and they're funneling humans to move towards some kind of checkpoint. But they also have this beautiful overlay of maybe sandblasted glass patterns that are quite science fiction. And also we can see the reflection in them, which is quite nice. So this is, I suspect, a real place because, we've got Istanbul here, and it looks like a real checkpoint. And I think that's great. If you have a good camera and you're not going to get busted by airport security or anything like that, it's worth taking photos in real life of places that already exist and look interesting, because they will look interesting in your concept art if you can bring them in there. Here again, just more light, color play, the scale of the woman behind the desk and how low she is compared to people who are standing maybe above her. There's a nice character here that I might be able to extract from this photo and implement into the perspective of my piece. Um, Here we have some really interesting carpet patterns, and that's sort of mimicking the skylight, which I really, really like. And yeah, maybe we can implement some of that back into the image. We've also got a curving countertop like we had in my previous image. There's so much about this that reminds me of the concept I did. I thought, hey, let's save this and see how much of this I can pull back into that image, or maybe just be inspired by. This wall here was really inspiring, and I really like how I can imagine creating this in 3D by a simple bevel effect and then using this as a mesh wall to separate an area the way it's been done here. I also really like how the green has been implemented into this area to be more appealing. And of course, the lighting is quite nice. We've got some really beautiful ambient light coming from outside here where the window is, and it's seeping onto this beautiful white clean surface. So I really like this image, and I've already made some notes about potentially incorporating this into my image. Here, I just really like the curvature of the ceiling, the reflections, maybe some passages. And I think this is the last image, is from Oblivion, which has an amazing art style. I recommend you guys just watch that movie for the art. It's quite spectacular. Um, and it's very clean. I think it's about the cleanest science fiction movie I've ever seen. And it came out a few years ago. It still holds up. It's a good movie, man. I really recommend you guys check it out. So besides using photos, I like to look at other people's art. This is from Mass Effect, and I really like how clean the science fiction look is. I also like that they just threw in a base DAS model to describe the scale of the image. Without having to render it, you have a pretty good indication of what's happening in the scene, and it allows people in production ahead of you to know how to build this and at what scale. Just more images, saving a whole bunch of in-game art or concept art that might inspire the form read of areas that I like. Also like elevation, that you will see I've included back into my brief because that's what we originally had. More Mass Effect, man, it still holds up. This stuff is so awesome, and the new guys are just totally killing it on this project. Here's another photo of some outside area because I really like the flowers and the feel that it's an indoor scene. More Mass Effect, more Mass Effect. Beautiful white clean surfaces. I really like this thick beveling that's happening here, and I really want to implement some of that into the concept once again, and trying to do it a bit more successfully this time. Beautiful lighting in this image. I really like the blues and the silvers and the whites. It's just so clean and comfortable. You can imagine it's, almost clinical, but it's very appealing. This repetition of pattern, very science fiction, wonderful scene. Here again, something's happening. It's a life scene, some plants inside. Really like it. I like this image because it has some different materials and it also breaks up the shape with light in a way that isn't distracting. We're still looking all around this image. Even though it's not a very strong narrative piece, it has a lot of design work because this is for Star Citizen, of course, and it's very clean. And in and of itself, I think that's quite appealing. Here's an epic door I found, and I thought that the lighting is really interesting and the surfaces are really interesting, and from a distance it looks quite clean. So that's just something I like, and I really like the cutouts, and that might be something I want to implement into the piece. Here are some really awesome Halo thumbnails from Halo 4. This was a while ago, but good drawing stands up. It never fails. And having created some overlay value reads on my previous image, which I'll show you guys after the brief, I might dive into some really fast, loose line work to describe what's happening with my scene, what perspective is doing, maybe some value control, maybe some narrative, and just getting that out as soon as we can and in a strong enough way that we can jump into the next process without delaying too much time. Wonderful image from Alien Colonial Marines, which was a beautiful looking game. Some really cool stuff happening with the pillars up here that we might implement back into the piece we're doing. I really like the language. I like how it's holding up the ceiling. I like how they have little um, lights on the ends, and they're quite subtle. You know, they wouldn't distract you. And there's also some nice form change here. It's going up and then it's bending. It's quite nice. Um, Again, some more Mass Effect. I really like these pillars here. I like this elevation point here and how it's at an angle, which is something I wanted to implement back into our piece, is this strong sense of angled pillars. I also really like how the ceiling is cut up here, and it's a very appealing image actually. I really love this hanger that they have. Here I just saved some texture reference for what panels look like, and just getting my head around what sci-fi is again. I mean, it's been a while since I've jumped into science fiction, and I just want to remember that cutouts and holes and little slits and little lights all add to a science fiction feel to something. Here we have some 3D assets which are describing exactly the same thing, and they're quite simplified. I especially like this little area here, which is just super simple. A little sticker or indication, but from a distance, you know, that would just be a flat panel. And I like that. I like that if I create this in 3D, that's the effect I'm going to get when I render it out. Some beautiful lighting, some lovely plant reference. Maybe I can extract some of this to put in my image. I really like the layout of this image, but I also saved it on purpose to show you guys what we're not really moving towards with this image we're going to be working on. This is a little bit on the extreme other side of what we're doing. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of weathering on this image. And it's really dirty. Like, you would not eat off this floor, right? Never. It's totally gross. And it's also just dark and foreboding and moody and atmospheric, and it almost it's in a dark science fiction feel, you know. And that's not what we want to do at all. So I think it's worth not only looking at what you want to do, but also looking at stuff that's like the other side of what you're trying to do, so that you know, okay, this is definitely not what we want. Keep that in mind and recognize the symbols in those things that like rust, like watermarks, like dirt, like wear and tear and scratches. Like, too much of this will take our image into this direction, and that's not what we want. Here's an image I absolutely love, and I think it's a great example of clean science fiction art. And this has almost every element that I love about my original image, except it's done in a wonderful way. I don't know how much of this is 3D, but I think it's like 90% 3D, if not more. I'm not sure, but it's quite wonderful. Here's another image from the same artist and same team, perhaps, same game, same IP. Lovely stuff here happening, some beautiful geometry on the floor, which I like, some very clean paneling breaks, some lovely rounded doorways, some color breaks. There's a lot about this image, the elevation, it's so close to what I'm trying to do. Here's some really beautiful detailed scenes of tables, computers, maybe objects in the scene, lights, very clean, repeated texture that reads wonderfully and isn't too distracting, some wonderful reflective light, some indication of glass and how that was treated to show this wonderful reflection. Some very soft lights here. A lot of stuff in this image I really like. It's not very guided by light, but it's got a lot of beautiful elements that I quite like. So I'm not going to dwell too long, guys. I just want to show you my thinking process and the kind of things I like to think about before I jump into an image. Here again, these wonderful large cut lines is something I saved this image for, and I'm hoping to implement back into my work. Here again, this is a classic image. That people are looking at all the time. It's a fantastic piece that is just sold this universe to so many fans. Again, more here, bridge, beautiful shape design, vegetation, again and again. Another fantastic piece by BioWare, describing a room, describing the bend of lights and the science fiction, the roundness, the softness, the color play, the clinicalness of it, the subject matter. Fantastic image. Here again, beautiful image outside. etc., etc. You guys see where I'm going with this. Wonderful, reflective metal. Love it. Um, so this is my process, guys. This is what I like to do. I like to jump around and get inspired, get like really excited about what I'm going to be doing. So let me bring up the brief. Here's a brief. It's called Futuristic Terminal for now, at least. And I like to start with a little bit of what, where, when, state, why, mood, design language. And this is a great way to start an image by writing a brief out for yourself so that you have parameters to work within. When you don't have parameters to work within, I believe that it's more difficult for us to nail down exactly what we're trying to do, and it can make us quite frustrated as artists. There have been a number of times where I've been working in-house and art director or some guy will come into my room and be like, hey, we need this thing. It has to look this way. Or they come in and they say, hey, we need this thing. And they don't really tell me what it looks like. And it's really vague. And they say, like, do your best and just come up with something cool. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll bring the cool factor. But often at those times, it's super stressful because you have nothing to go off of. So in times like that, I like to spend 5 minutes to type out something like this and try and give myself some kind of visual mental direction of where to go. So let's have a look at this. In fact, let me bring up the old piece quick. There we go. And let's minimize it a bit so we can just have it off in one direction while we read this thing. Oh, come back. Boom. Right. Okay, now let's look at this next to that. Okay, so what have we got? We've got what, right? The first thing. What are you painting? Simple. A futuristic terminal with different functional areas and elevations. So there's a function here. There's maybe a passage down there that we need to do or go to. Maybe we're going to add stuff still to this scene. And then, of course, different areas of elevation because I want to keep authentic and close to this original image that I did. And it does have an elevated upstairs area. Maybe we're going to change that entirely and make it way more appealing. Maybe we're going to break through the ceiling here and create some kind of skylight or something. Then where, right? Um, I said here, the world we see is set in a utopian-looking far future, perhaps on a peaceful, neutral planet with a clean atmosphere. So we can see that in this image, and we can see from the inspiration we've been looking at that that's exactly what we want. When? So I think it's important to establish a time of day, just so you know what your lighting is doing. So I wrote here, time of day is just reaching noon, so we're going to have a lot of bright morning light, and it's going to be at an angle to maybe give us some shadows. And I wrote here, the light from the planet's sun pours into the scene from a large window. And I think that's because in this scene, that was the original thing that was happening, and it created that appeal that I quite liked. And we'll see if we can replicate that moving forward. So here I wrote state of decay and age. And I think that's important because you tend to establish how old or how new something is and how clean it is. And in the state of this image, we want things to be pretty clean. So I wrote the inside of the terminal is almost spotless with perhaps a few indications of age, such as pockets of moisture from an event or two. Okay, so when we looked at that old image of the really nasty, rusty stuff, that's not what we want. We just want a little bit of it, but not all of it. And why? Why are we making this image? The terminal serves as a multiple entry point, entry and exit point for various modes of transport. Lanes are clearly defined and demarcated for traveling citizens. Expect obvious assets such as signs, indications, select sectioned areas, access and exit points. So I wrote this with my own experience of moving through terminals in airports and train stations and noticing that that's typically what you see. And I think we all recognize that and we all expect that as an audience. So I wrote that here so we can maybe try and implement a bit more of that into an image like this and we can really be sure of exactly where we are. So mood to an image is really important, and I think it's something that I only started implementing a little bit later into my career. And I really recommend you guys think about this a lot because simply coming up with a description for mood can really push a piece towards not only lighting and color, but giving the audience an emotional reaction to your piece, which is, I think, probably the strongest thing you can do for an image. So here I wrote, there is an air of peace and tranquility. And that first sentence should summarize the entire image, right? The whole thing should just be a lovely day in the park, just absolute peace, tranquility, nothing's going wrong, no one's walking into the scene with guns, no one's threatening this planet, none of that. Then I wrote, a quiet morning in this section of the terminal. Okay, it's quiet. Only a few people can be seen. Everyone is quietly lounging around and checking their luggage in and verifying travel information, of course. Sunlight enters the scene and provides much needed warmth to the main area of focus, a comfortable lounging area for travelers. A few plants can be seen, providing some life to what would otherwise be just another synthetic environment. Perhaps areas are separated by tints of colored lighting. So that was an idea that came from looking at the inspiration. And again, it's so important to just look at stuff and ask yourself what looks cool. And so that is something I put in a little bit of a question mark because I don't know how it's going to work. But I'm going to try put it into my early stage development paintings. And before we move into final, we'll know whether or not it's going to make it into the final image or look good. And then the last thing, which is really important, is what kind of design language are we using? I wrote soft edges with and simple reflective surfaces. This is based on my original concept and what I was trying to do. Clean architecture that is well defined for function and aesthetics. So it has to be interesting, like this little V-shaped pillar or the way things are bending. It's got to have some of that appeal. Um, then soft cut lines juxtaposed by larger cuts, form cuts. So that again was from the inspiration we looked at, where big surfaces are cut by larger beveling, and smaller surfaces maybe have some more of this small cut line stuff. Elaborate carpet design in the main area, that was also from that inspiration, and maybe sucking back to this old image and what we're trying to reproduce. And we want some of that Swiss cheese beveled walls because they look so badass. I also wrote here glass floors in areas, maybe just to break up the floor into areas where people can walk and where they can't walk, or perhaps they can walk over all of it. But the idea would be to create a more science fiction feel to the floor and less of a concrete, less of a typical place that we would be used to. I wrote here that pillars are diagonal, and I wrote that because we have a lot of diagonal pillars in our scene, and I think that's a really cool aesthetic, and it's very Mass Effect, and it's very science fiction and appealing. So I also wrote here, floating UI designs are visible and perhaps appear on glass surfaces. So that is evident in our original piece, and it should also be evident in that inspirational piece that we saw earlier, where is it? You know the one I'm talking about. Photos. Where is it? This guy. Yeah, we really like this. So I'm going to try and implement some of that. So thanks for watching the second part of this video, guys. I really hope this helped you. And I hope that moving forward, we can start to work on this image and move into the thumbnail process. And from there, develop a really cool image. Thanks for watching.